Nelson Sullivan was born on March 15, 1948, in Kershaw, South Carolina. He was the youngest of two sons, whose older brother's name was Mark Sullivan. When Nelson was 5 years old, a new family moved into the house next door, and this family also had a son, whose name was James Dick Richards III. Richards would go on to become Nelson's lifelong friend and creative partner. Here is some of what Richards told BettyJack.com's John Sanchez. Quote, "As a lonely child myself, when my family moved next door to Nelson's and I found out that Nelson was going to be my playmate, that was one of the happiest days of my life." The two boys attended school together in the 50s and 1960s, and they both struggled because the other children had clocked both of them as being gay. But it wasn't all bad for Nelson and Dick, who explains, quote, "Our parents' generation were exhausted from the wars, and there was an interest in sophistication and intellect. Everyone read a lot. Nelson and I had both read Auntie Mame by the time we were 10. Nelson's family was attached to a large cotton fortune, and his mother provided him with talented teachers for piano and art. During this time, Nelson was hospitalized after falling into an abandoned gold mine. It was nearly fatal, and although Sullivan would survive, the accident would leave him with permanent physical limitations." Richards continues, quote, "The town center theater screened 5 different movies a week. Television was filled with exciting images of places like New York. The elements are the deep background for Nelson's video art. Loving to go out and experience the glamour of nightclubs and the theater after having envied it for so long, relishing the freedom that a large city gives for self-expression that a small town scorns." Nelson graduated from Davidson College in Davidson, North Carolina in 1971. At that time, while many other young men were being sent off to the Vietnam War, Nelson Sullivan was classed as an F4 by the military, which is the classification given to persons who are disabled and unfit physically for military service. This classification was given to Sullivan due to the results of his near-fatal childhood fall into an abandoned gold mine. At the time, it was more common for a gay man to be rejected from military service using a Section 8, meaning that they were mentally unfit for military service. Freed from the burden of service, Sullivan moved to Manhattan in 1971 as a classically trained pianist and composer. He took postgraduate studies, which included film school. Nelson also ran his own hair salon that had a summer location on Fire Island. Later on, Sullivan became a cab driver and then a part-time music consultant at Joseph Paddleson Music House, next to Carnegie Hall. The part-time hours allowed Nelson the freedom to experience much of New York City's nightlife. In 1982, Nelson paid a visit to his friend Dick Richards, who was living in Atlanta producing the American Music Show with the newly available home video equipment on Atlanta's public access television channel. Sullivan was so impressed with Richards' new video camera that he bought his own shortly thereafter. From Sullivan's wiki page, quote, "In 1983, Sullivan began videotaping his excursions to booming nightclubs, Limelight, Danceteria, and Tunnel, as well as dives like the Pyramid Club and CBGB. Because many of Sullivan's friends had aspirations in show business, they invited him to videotape their performances, and he gave them copies of the tapes. He also sent video reports to Richards, who showed them as part of the American Music Show. It was also through Dick Richards that Nelson met RuPaul, Larry T., and Lahoma Van Zant. Richards said, quote, "I introduced all of them to Nelson. Larry T. and Lahoma's band, now Explosion, persuaded me and my business partner, Ted Rubenstein, to release their first record, and RuPaul had come into our scene through my cable TV show. These talented kids were heading up from Atlanta to the Pyramid Club for shows, and I got Nelson to go over and videotape them. It was love at first sight, and Nelson is totally responsible for the main hookup that got RuPaul where he is today. Richards, of course, was speaking of Fenton Bailey and Randy Barbado, who would go on to form World of Wonder Productions that would guide RuPaul's career to superstardom. Larry T and Lahoma would move to New York in 1987 and move in with Nelson Sullivan at 5 9th Avenue. In the last 6 years of Nelson's life, he would record over 1,800 hours of footage, documenting the beginnings of artists like RuPaul, Delight, Larry T, and Michael Alec, and existing artists like Keith Haring, Andy Warhol, Quentin Crisp, and Sylvia Miles. But what is perhaps even more compelling is his documentation of those artists and performers who may have been virtually lost to history without Sullivan's recordings, like Ethel Eichelberger, Taboo, Julie Jules, and Christina. Dick Richards perfectly summed up the appeal of Nelson's work when he said, quote, "Nelson's videos are beautiful art with an associated experience that simulates time travel." In 2021, Larry T spoke the following about Nelson Sullivan, quote, "At times, Nelson was like a happy, hyperactive life coach, and at other times, he could barely drag his broken body up the steps because of his bouts of depression. Looking back, he seemed more than a little haunted, as if he knew he was living on borrowed time." In the summer of '89, Sullivan, who had been advised by Richards, decided to create his own public access television show that would air in New York City. He quit his job and cashed in his retirement savings and prepared to begin his new show, a show that sadly would never happen. On July 2nd, Nelson recorded the raw video that he was planning on editing into his first television show. He hoped to make the first episode of his show a tribute to his friend Christina, who had passed only days before. On July 3rd, Nelson Sullivan recorded what would be his last video. Nelson and artist Bill Moy take his dog Blackout for a walk to the pier in the late afternoon. As Moy and Blackout run ahead, Nelson says, quote, "They're running all the way out there to the end of the pier, but I don't feel like running today. It's July the 3rd, and it's the last day that I'm going to have not to be running." In the early hours of July 4th, Nelson Sullivan passed away of an apparent heart attack. His remains were returned to Kershaw, South Carolina, and he was buried in Kershaw City Cemetery. He was 41 years old. There is much disagreement among Nelson's friends and fans about what actually happened to Sullivan in those final hours. The fact that Nelson seems to predict his own passing in his very last video has become a kind of urban legend. When asked about this, here is what Dick Richards had to say. Quote, "Nelson was in that forgotten group of Americans that even to this day have problematic access to healthcare, so it's hard to know for sure. What I have been told is that the actual passing was inside the hospital, making an autopsy unnecessary. One of Nelson's grandfathers passed from a heart attack at the exact same age. Perhaps a genetic disorder." After Sullivan's passing, Dick Richards retrieved Nelson's library and brought them to his Atlanta home that he shared with life partner David Goldman and business partner Ted Rubenstein. The videos themselves would be cataloged over the span of several years by Richards, and then in 1993, Richards and David Goldman met Robert Coddington, who was a young archivist, historian, documenting queer culture. Coddington found that Sullivan's work answered questions that he had about what was going on in the queer world during that time in history when the AIDS epidemic was ripping apart the culture. Dick Richards and Robert Coddington began to collaborate in 2001 on selecting tapes, producing DVDs, and launching a YouTube channel, 5 9th Avenue Project. Richards did all of this at his own personal expense. The original tapes were boxed in the home of Dick Richards and David Goldman. In order to preserve the tapes, in 2012, Dick Richards, David Goldman, and Robert Coddington donated the originals to the Fales Library and Special Collections Unit at New York University, per Coddington's outreach. Since Richards' passing, David Goldman and Robert Coddington have now taken over the task of documenting and archiving Nelson Sullivan's legacy, as well as that of Dick Richards. Well, that's pretty much everything for today. I want to thank you guys for watching this video. Leave a like if you enjoyed this, and feel free to comment and subscribe to this channel, and I will see you guys again for my next upload.